Hi guys, welcome to Garden on a Hill where we talk about easy home gardening. My name is Vin and today I'm going to take you on a trip to your local big box store, specifically Lowe's. This is not sponsored by Lowe's by any means, but that is just the closest available big box store or any nursery around my area. There are local nurseries, but they're a little further away, so I just wanted to share how this works for me because typically I go there to get my bag mixes for my raised beds. In 2022, how much is the pricing currently? And also, what have I been using as a constant mix that work for myself? Two things to consider. What works for your pockets? What works for your vegetables? What is the base minimum, most affordable best soil I've used at Lowe's to have good products in my garden? Of course, you can always compost on your own. You can always buy the best bag mix, but specifically, what do I use from Lowe's and how I use the principles I've learned throughout gardening is a good way to have an idea how this video would go. So if you have some time today, let's go ahead, come with me, let's drive to Lowe's. Okay, so right now I am at Lowe's and you can see there is a lot of product everywhere. And this is what I tell you, you pretty much get overwhelmed when you get into the store and you're a new gardener. So come on, let's go ahead and see the things that they have here. So if you go into a Lowe's, you will be met with this mess. And you get lost on what you need. Here we go, I am back with all the bags and it's a lot. So if you go and you need help, you may need a bigger car, make sure you have those before you are like me, going there with a small Prius and hauling this all off with that small car. We are good though, we made it. And if you go in there, as you can see, it's very overwhelming. So before I even explain how we're going to do this, let's just have a quick run through of what those bags mean in the soil section. I would like you to look at Gary Plarchik, the Rusted Gardens videos. He has a very detailed descriptions what those soil bags are. So you just have the general knowledge and the principle. Let's break it down to into three, and this is how he described it. First types would be the topsoils. Topsoils are just fill dirt. Fill dirt with sometimes it comes with some bark, mulch, but not really a lot of organic matter. It hasn't been broken down to that much. It's a good type to fill soils in for the lawn in general. Not a lot of value for organic matter for your vegetables. There is a way to kind of, manipulate that so you can have a topsoil for the garden, but it does take time. It's not immediate. It could also be a topsoil premium where they add peat moss so it can retain more moisture on it. Now that's the first type, $1. Those would be the cheapest soil bags. I do not recommend it if you're starting a raised bed or any vegetable planting at all, even in ground, because it doesn't really give you good results. And it will be the cheapest though. The second types would be the garden soils, and there would be a wide variety and array of these garden soils. It's basically the same thing as topsoil, but then you add more compost, more manure, more organic matter. Sometimes it has peat moss to add more water retention to it, because those are the things you need to have good soil. This is the type that I advise you get when you're starting your own raised beds that are in ground. Make sure they are in ground. By in ground, I mean the bed touches the ground or there's soil. If it's an elevated bed, that's another type of soil you need to use. So the principle you're going to have to look at is what would be the best garden soil mix that's the cheapest for you, because they're pretty much the same literally on everything. It's hard to pinpoint. I've read through the back portions of each garden soil bag, and it's really hard to know which is better. Just get the cheapest among all of them. So that's your $2 garden soil, raised bed soil. Sometimes that's how they call it. The third type is going to be your potting mix soil. Your potting mix soil is going to be the types that you use for pots and planters, and that's another bed I'm going to fill today, a planter type bed where it's not touching the ground, because for this part you need something that holds more moisture. Basically the same as garden soil, it just has more water retention to it, and sometimes it does have more fertilizer into it. It's a little lighter, it can hold more water, and it's typically more expensive. You'll have $3 signs for those potting mixes. That's the biggest group of all these bags, and that's how we apply those principles. So Gary can go in and talk about that. Go to his videos, it's really good. Now, talking about the mix itself, a good reference would be, I think his name is Mel Bartholomew from Square Foot Gardening. He has a good way of describing what is the best mix. But then if you do look at his, I think it's vermiculite, peat moss, and then organic matter, a third of each, it's going to be really expensive for you to fill raised beds up. But he does explain to you what is the best soil mix for raised beds. And I guess that's just the general concept of it. Now let's look into what I have been using those principles that I've learned throughout time to make the best and most affordable 2022 soil mix from Lowe's that I use. So this will be the first one that we will fill up. If you have a big pot or a planter that's not touching the ground, this will be similar. This is an elevated raised bed. The raised bed itself is about 12 inches deep and then about 4 foot by 2 foot in length and width, and it doesn't touch the ground. So we will consider this as like a pot, basically, because it needs to hold more water retention and it needs to have better fertilizers or organic matters in the mix because it can't get any supplements from the ground itself. So if you have a situation like this, this is what my best mix is that works for me in the most affordable way. Of course, you can just fill this up with a regular potting mix of any kind that you can buy from the big box stores, but that will most likely cost you about $30 to $50 just to fill this bed, or possibly more. Anyway, let's look into what I have currently in there. So if you get one of these raised beds, or you make one, you initially would have a plastic around it so all the water or some soil doesn't go through at the bottom because there's holes at the bottom. What I put in addition to that before I fill this bed is put a lot of cardboard. And I know if you are an organic gardener, you are turned off at this point because this is not the best for organic gardening, but it does offer you a good biodegradable, water retentive medium. So I put a lot of these cardboards, taking out all the packaging plastics around it, and use that as my base to hold the water. Okay, so I have my soil mix lined up here for you to see easier. But before I proceed further, I just want to let you know I fill the cardboards up about 4 inches in there. Typically with plants, they need about 12 to 18 inches to go into the soil, depending on what you're planting to get the nutrients. If you have radishes, they're probably only going to need 6 inches. If you have tomatoes in there, which I'm not going to plant here, you'll need about 18 inches. And if you are not satisfied with using cardboard because you have more organic principles, maybe what you use is what I use on this other bed, which is leaves and scraps from the garden, from the lawn trimmings, and it would be the same thing. Just fill it up about 4 inches and you should be good and you feel more comfortable. So what I start with the mix that's most affordable to me. Of course, what's available to you would be soil. This is just local dirt I got from the backyard. It's about 1 cubic foot. This is evergreen compost and manure. It's about 1 cubic foot, $3.28 a bag. So that means you need 2, and it would be around $6.86. Black cow manure, that's going to be the one that's going to give your boost of fertilizer and organic matter. this already has some compost and manure, but this further boosts the mix itself. This is more expensive. It's about $5.28. And then the last one is a soil conditioner. Now, a soil conditioner is not actually a type of soil, it's an amendment. So this is very loose pine bark that's granulated, almost like a cereal or an oat texture. That's pine bark. It's really fine, and I use that because I want to break down my local clay soil, and it does give a good feel. So soil conditioners, you usually use that for heavy clay soil, but since I'm adding free soil here, I do use that soil conditioner. And this is the basic package. It's about $16 to $17 to fill a 2x4 bed that's about 12 inches deep, and that's a good amount of money that you're saving, and this is what I typically use. So let's go ahead and fill this up, but before you do that, while I'm putting my gloves on here, make sure that all the cardboards inside are wet. You don't want dry cardboards or dry leaves in there, because what happens is when you put the soil in there, it will always be like a dry sponge trying to suck in everything. So what I do is I wet the cardboard again. This has been sitting here for 3 days being rained on, so much of it's already wet. I just need to pour more water in there. And what I've done is, it's been raining, so I just took my scissors, poked through holes in there to make sure everything's soaking wet. So I'm just going to pour all the bags evenly. There's no specific order. So I still have 2 bags left, the manure and the compost. Before I put it in there, I want to just mix it. And there's 2 ways to do it. You can just use your little trowel manually to mix everything. But the easiest way is if you have a bulb driller. This is the one, a drill attachment with a bulb drill, and you just mix it all up like this. That's it for this one, and let's move on to the other bed. So here we are at scenario 2. I have 2 beds, 1, 2 right here, and the star green flower and vegetable garden soil is already on top of them. They're about 2 cubic foot bags for $7.98 a piece. So as you can see, if it's a pre-mixed garden soil, it's already expensive. So that's already $16 just for 2. But that's the cheapest garden soil I can find in my area. Now I'm just using this to infill an existing bed, which is this and this. It means last year I already planted here with some fill, and this is what you use when you're just trying to refill your beds. That's the cheapest way. This would be the 2 good ones, unless you have free compost, of course, that will work for you. But let's look at the current beds and how it looks like. So I actually put a layer of leaf from an oak tree above me that's just been falling, and it has protected the soil from last year. So look at this. Very good soil, well protected. And what I actually just do is just leave the leaves there and put my garden soil mix on top. That's what I will do with these 2 beds. And if you're just in a hurry, you can use these as the cheapest, most affordable, I guess, option for filling beds or refilling them. The other way is this. You can see these 2 beds are so empty. I haven't used them last year. I built them last year and started to pile all the garden scraps here. Leaves, twigs, anything that's compostable was set here. And look at this now. Look how beautiful that is. That is just beautiful soil. And it's easy. We're all about easy gardening. So we just piled up all our scraps on these 2 beds. And now I have a good organic base. that I'm just going to add good fill dirt on. I may buy those bags to fill it up, but if it's too expensive, I'm going to do half and half. Half local dirt and then half of those bags to fill this, since I already have a lot of organic matter going on. So just to give you an idea, that's what I do when I'm refilling my beds just with pre-mixed bags to save some money. This concept, I believe, is hugelkultur. I've done this. I didn't know it was a concept before. I was just doing it. It's a German concept of basically composting in the beds, and I've been doing this a long time. I just didn't know that it was an actual method, and it does work. So if you want to go Google or YouTube hugelkultur, you will see this method, and it does work. It's the cheapest way. It just does take some time. This would be very good to plant now, but it's not a good way to start a garden because you won't maximize the nutrients if it's not broken down yet. You'll actually see the leaves under here. Hear that? So I just buried the leaves in there. It's about a 4-inch layer of new garden soil. I have done that before. I only advise you to do that if you are having to have a raised bed that's mostly vines. This is going to be the trellis for my vines. The reason why is it's going to work definitely with non-vining vegetables, but it's not going to be a compact soil where a tomato can have good rooting in there, because the leaves will eventually make the soil loose when it decomposes. So I just did that for these two because it's where I plant my vines anyway, so I can support the plant. But otherwise, you may want to take the leaves out. So that is it. That is how I fill a raised elevated planter in my raised beds. I hope you learned something from it. I hope that you can apply the same principles. I'm actually going to come back and add peat moss into the one that's an elevated planter because I feel like it needs more water retentive capabilities. Peat moss is not going to be part of that package, that $16 package. This is a lot more expensive. This is actually what you add to potting mixes. So this is about a 3 cubic foot bag, $13.99, so quite expensive. I'm going to use about 3 handful peat mosses. This is kind of a as needed amendment that you can add just to add more sponginess and soil retention in there. You don't want to add too much because it does affect the acidity of the soil. So I'm just going to sprinkle in a few 3 handfuls in there. Also, I'm going to add another amendment. This is an organic alfalfa pellet. This is basically feed for horses and goats, and sometimes cows love it too. This is about $16 for the entire bag, so this is expensive, but I only use about 2 handfuls for all each bed. So that bed I'll probably just use 2 handfuls. It's just a slow release nitrogen fertilizer that's organic for my beds. It takes about 20 days to fully break down. So again, if you're interested, you can add these as well, but not necessary on what we already have in there. Anyway, that is it. That is the episode for today, and hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you get out there and experiment yourself. Next time I'll see you, we'll plant some things on the beds that I've prepared. See you later.